Across rugged ridges and frozen valleys, moments of pursuit can turn into sudden chaos when powerful creatures fight back. Camps collapse, rifles are dropped, and survival hinges on seconds. From a Montana cliffside in 2025 to a Slovakian tent raid in 2021, the encounters stretch across continents. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters that remain unforgettable. On October 5, 2025, the rugged ridges of western Montana stretched endlessly under a pale dawn sky, their slopes covered in frost-coated sagebrush and jagged outcroppings of granite that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. This region had been wild country for centuries, a place where elk, deer, and predators roamed freely across steep valleys and windswept plateaus. The terrain was unforgiving, with loose scree that could send a careless hunter tumbling hundreds of feet, and weather that shifted from clear to blizzard conditions within hours. It was the kind of place that demanded respect, where nature held absolute authority and human presence felt temporary at best. Brothers Ethan and Cole Barrett had been hunting these mountains since their teenage years, joined this particular morning by their friends Ryan Merkel and Mark Vinson. The 4 men moved carefully through the timber, rifles loaded with .300 Win Mag rounds, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They had been tracking a massive bull elk for nearly 3 hours, following fresh tracks and droppings that indicated the animal was close. The elk's prints were enormous, suggesting a mature bull that could weigh over 900 pounds with antlers that would make any hunter's heart race. The group split into pairs, with Ethan and Mark taking the high ridge while Cole and Ryan circled below to cut off any escape route. The plan was simple enough, the kind of coordinated effort that experienced hunters executed routinely. But the mountain had other plans that morning, plans that would transform what should have been a straightforward hunt into something far more terrifying. Ethan spotted movement first, a flash of tawny hide through the scattered pines. He signaled to Mark, who nodded and began moving into position. The bull elk was magnificent, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder with antlers that spread wider than a man's outstretched arms. But something seemed off about the animal's behavior. Instead of the cautious alertness typical of elk during hunting season, this bull seemed agitated, almost panicked. The reason became clear moments later when a massive grizzly bear emerged from a thicket of serviceberry bushes roughly 60 yards downslope. The bear was enormous, easily 1,400 pounds of muscle, fur, and fury. Its shoulder blades rolled beneath its coat with each movement, and its massive head swung back and forth as it tested the air. The grizzly had likely been stalking the same elk, drawn by the scent of the rut and the promise of easy meat. What happened next unfolded with the terrible speed of a landslide. The elk, caught between the hunters above and the grizzly below, made a desperate choice. It exploded from the timber in a full charge, not away from danger but straight up the slope toward Ethan and Mark. The bull's antlers were lowered like weapons, its eyes rolling white with terror, and its hooves hammered the loose scree with the force of jackhammers. Ethan had perhaps 2 seconds to react. He dove sideways, his rifle flying from his hands as he rolled behind a boulder. Mark was not as fortunate. The elk's shoulder caught him square in the chest, lifting him off his feet and sending him sliding backward across the slick, frost-covered rocks. He tumbled helplessly, his arms windmilling as he tried to find purchase, sliding directly toward the edge of a steep cliff that dropped away into a rocky chasm below. Cole, watching from his position downslope, saw his friend careening toward disaster and fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to turn the elk. The crack of the rifle echoed across the ridgeline, but instead of fleeing, the enraged bull spun on its hind legs with surprising agility for such a large animal. It spotted Ryan, who had been scrambling up the slope to help, and charged again. The elk's antler tip caught Ryan's shoulder, raking through his jacket and leaving a bloody gash across his upper arm. The 4 hunters were now scattered across the treacherous slope, separated by loose rocks and patches of ice, with an elk that had transformed from prey into something far more dangerous. But their situation was about to get exponentially worse. The grizzly, alerted by the gunshot and the commotion, began moving upslope toward the source of the noise, its massive paws finding purchase where humans struggled. Ethan managed to grab his rifle and get back to his feet, his heart hammering so hard he could feel his pulse in his temples. Mark had somehow caught himself on a twisted juniper bush just feet from the cliff edge, his legs dangling over space. Cole and Ryan were trying to reach him, but the elk stood between them and their friend, pawing at the ground and snorting, its sides heaving. The bear was now less than 40 yards away and closing fast. Grizzlies could cover ground at speeds approaching 35 miles per hour, and on this downslope angle, the animal was moving like a freight train. Its jaws were partially open, revealing teeth the size of a man's thumb, and its claws left furrows in the dirt with each step. Cole made a split-second decision that likely saved all their lives. Instead of shooting the elk or trying to scare it away, he aimed for the animal's shoulder, a kill shot that would drop it quickly. The rifle bucked against his shoulder and the bull staggered, its front legs buckling. The massive animal stumbled sideways, crashed into a pine trunk, then turned and retreated downslope, directly into the path of the charging grizzly. The bear, confronted with wounded prey that was easier than the humans above, shifted its attention immediately. It slammed into the elk with the force of a car crash, and both animals tumbled together down the steep slope in a cascade of dust, broken branches, and flying rocks. The four hunters did not wait to see the outcome. Ethan and Ryan hauled Mark back from the cliff edge while Cole provided cover, his rifle trained on the chaos below. Mark's ribs were badly bruised, possibly cracked, and Ryan's shoulder wound was bleeding steadily through his torn jacket. All four men were gasping, their hands shaking from adrenaline, their faces pale despite the exertion. They retreated carefully, keeping their rifles ready, moving as quickly as the terrain would allow back toward their truck parked miles away. Behind them, the sounds of the bear and elk faded into the morning mist. Later, after they had driven to the nearest clinic and gotten Mark and Ryan patched up, they would reflect on how close they had come to disaster. The mountain had reminded them in the most visceral way possible that hunters could become prey in seconds, that nature's food chain had no respect for human plans, and that survival sometimes depended on nothing more than luck, timing, and the willingness of friends to risk everything for each other. On December 5, 2023, the remote backcountry of British Columbia stretched across thousands of square miles of untamed wilderness, a landscape of dense spruce forests, frozen lakes, and mountain valleys where winter arrived early and stayed late. This particular region had been a traditional hunting ground for indigenous peoples for millennia before European settlers arrived, and even in the modern era it remained largely untouched by human development. The terrain was notorious for its unpredictability during winter months, when temperatures could plummet to 40 below zero, and blizzards could trap unwary travelers for days. Local wildlife had adapted to these brutal conditions over countless generations, becoming hardy, aggressive, and utterly unforgiving to those who underestimated them. Hunter Logan Hayes had been pursuing a massive bull moose through this frozen wilderness for nearly 6 hours when the blizzard struck. Logan was an experienced outdoorsman who had hunted across Canada for over 15 years, and he carried a reliable .300 Win Mag rifle that had never failed him. The bull he tracked was enormous, with antlers that spread nearly 6 feet across, the kind of trophy that hunters dreamed about for entire lifetimes. Fresh tracks in the snow indicated the animal was close, perhaps just beyond the next ridge or hidden in the thick timber ahead. The blizzard arrived with shocking speed, as they often did in this part of British Columbia. One moment, Logan could see clearly for several hundred yards, and the next he was surrounded by a swirling wall of white that reduced visibility to barely 10 feet. Snow came down in sheets, driven by winds that howled through the spruce trees and sent loose powder swirling in chaotic patterns. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Logan knew he should probably seek shelter, but the moose tracks were so fresh that he convinced himself he could push forward just a bit longer. The creek appeared suddenly through the blizzard, a dark ribbon of partially frozen water cutting through the white landscape. Logan could see where the moose had crossed, the ice broken and disturbed along one bank. He tested the ice carefully with one boot, found it reasonably solid, and began making his way across. The creek was perhaps 20 feet wide at this point, with water flowing beneath a layer of ice that varied in thickness from several inches to barely a crust. He was halfway across when the bull moose materialized from the blizzard like a vengeful spirit. The animal came from upstream, where it had been standing in the shelter of overhanging spruce branches, and it charged directly at Logan with its massive head lowered and eyes blazing with territorial fury. Bull moose during winter were notoriously aggressive, their temperaments made worse by the stress of the rut season that had just passed and the challenge of surviving in deep snow. Logan tried to sidestep, but his boot caught on a ridge of ice and he went down hard. The impact sent cracked spiderwebbing across the frozen surface, and suddenly he was plunging through into the frigid water below. The shock of the cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and causing his muscles to seize. The water was chest deep at this point, moving fast enough to pull at his legs and threaten his balance. The moose crashed onto the ice behind him, its enormous weight shattering the surface completely. Both hunter and animal were now partially in the water, but the moose had 4 legs for stability, while Logan struggled to keep his head above the surface. The current began pulling him downstream, away from the crossing point toward where the creek narrowed between rocks and fallen timber. His rifle slipped from his numbing fingers and floated ahead of him, bumping against ice chunks and debris. Snow-laden branches from overhanging trees scraped across Logan's face and arms as the current swept him along. He clawed desperately at the ice edge, trying to find purchase, but his gloves were soaked and his fingers were already losing feeling. Behind him, the moose thrashed in the broken ice, its massive antlers swinging dangerously close every time Logan tried to pull himself up. The animal's hooves pawed at the brittle ice, sending more chunks breaking free and making the situation increasingly desperate. Logan's survival instincts took over completely. He kicked hard against the current, using what remained of his strength to angle himself toward the far bank where the ice looked thicker. The moose lunged again, its antlers skimming inches from his face, close enough that he could smell its breath and see the wild panic in its eyes. The animal was as desperate to escape as Logan was, trapped by the same broken ice and freezing water. With a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Logan kicked off from a submerged rock and rolled his body onto a snow-covered section of bank. He dragged himself forward on his elbows, away from the water, while the moose finally found its footing and heaved itself onto the opposite bank. Both hunter and animal lay gasping in the snow for several moments, separated by the churning creek. The moose recovered first, shaking itself like a massive dog before trotting off into the blizzard. Logan forced himself to move, knowing that staying still in wet clothes meant certain death from hypothermia. He retrieved his rifle from where it had washed up against a log downstream, then began the agonizing journey back toward his truck, miles away through the storm. His entire body shook uncontrollably, his clothes were freezing solid against his skin, and every step was torture. He made it back barely conscious, hypothermic and severely bruised, but alive. Later, after recovering in a hospital, Logan would reflect on how quickly the backcountry could transform from beautiful wilderness into a death trap, and how even experienced hunters could find themselves as prey when nature decided to remind them who truly ruled these frozen forests. On September 24, 2024, Kodiak Island off the coast of Alaska represented one of North America's last true wilderness frontiers, a place where massive brown bears outnumbered human residents, and the landscape remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. The island stretched across roughly 3,600 square miles of rugged mountains, dense temperate rainforest, and windswept coastal plains. For thousands of years, the native Alutiiq people had hunted and fished these shores, developing a healthy respect for the enormous bears that shared their territory. Hunters Jason Carter and Tyler Reynolds had arrived on the island 3 days earlier, seeking Sitka black-tailed deer that thrived in the island's coastal forests and alpine meadows. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen who had hunted across Alaska for years, but this was their first trip to Kodiak, and they approached the expedition with appropriate caution. Jason carried a Ruger Hawkeye chambered in .375 H&H Magnum, a rifle specifically chosen for its stopping power against large bears. Tyler had brought a Benelli Super Black Eagle 12-gauge shotgun loaded with 3-inch slugs, another weapon designed to handle the island's most dangerous residents. The morning of September 18th found them traversing a narrow ridge roughly 8 miles from their base camp, moving through thick fog that had rolled in from the ocean during the night. The fog transformed the familiar into something alien and disorienting, muffling sounds and hiding everything beyond 15 feet in a ghostly gray curtain. Spruce and alder trees loomed suddenly from the mist, their branches dripping with condensation, and the ground beneath their boots was slick with moss and decomposing vegetation. They had been glassing for deer sign when Jason noticed fresh bear tracks crossing the ridge, enormous prints that dwarfed his own boot by comparison. The tracks were recent enough that water was still seeping into the depressions, meaning the bear had passed through within the last hour. Both men chambered rounds and kept their weapons ready, moving more cautiously as they continued along the ridge. The attack came without warning, the way bear attacks often did on Kodiak Island. One moment, Jason and Tyler were picking their way through fallen logs and thick undergrowth, and the next, a massive Kodiak bear erupted from cover below the ridgeline, charging upward with terrifying speed. The bear was enormous, easily 1,600 pounds of muscle and fury, its brown coat darkened by the morning mist and its massive head swinging from side to side as it locked onto the hunters. The bear's roar was deafening in the fog-muffled silence, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere primal and ancient, reverberating through their chests like thunder. Its claws, each as long as a man's finger, tore into the loose soil as it powered up the steep slope, covering ground faster than seemed possible for an animal of its size. Jason raised his rifle and fired, the heavy recoil slamming against his shoulder, but his first shot went high in his panic, clipping the bear's shoulder without penetrating deep enough to stop the charge. The hunters tried to retreat, but the terrain worked against them completely. Fallen logs blocked their path, forcing them to climb over obstacles while keeping their weapons ready. The ridge was slick with moss and wet leaves, causing Tyler to slip and nearly lose his footing. Behind them, the bear closed the distance with horrifying speed, its breath coming in huffs that they could hear even over their own panicked gasping. Tyler swung his heavy backpack off his shoulders and hurled it at the bear's face, a desperate move that actually connected with the animal's snout. The bear flinched and shook its head, momentarily distracted, giving Jason time to chamber another round and fire again. This shot hit true, slamming into the bear's shoulder and causing it to stumble. But Kodiak bears were notoriously difficult to stop, their thick hide and dense muscle mass allowing them to absorb damage that would drop other animals instantly. The bear lunged forward again, this time targeting Tyler specifically. Its massive paw swung in an arc that would have decapitated a man if it had connected fully, but Tyler threw himself sideways at the last instant. The blow still caught him on the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him tumbling down the slope in a tangle of limbs and equipment. His shotgun went flying, disappearing into the thick undergrowth, and his gear scattered across the hillside. Jason fired again, working the bolt action frantically and putting another round into the bear's chest. The animal roared again, this time with clear pain and frustration, but it still did not retreat. Instead, it advanced on Jason, who had backed himself against a fallen spruce log with nowhere left to go. He could see the bear's eyes clearly now, small and dark and filled with rage. Could see the saliva dripping from its jaws and the blood matting its fur from the wounds he had inflicted. Tyler, bruised and battered from his tumble down the slope, managed to grab his shotgun and scrambled back up toward his friend. He fired both barrels in rapid succession, the heavy slugs hitting the bear in the side and finally convincing it that these particular prey animals were not worth the continued effort. The bear spun away, dropping to all fours, and disappeared into the fog with shocking speed, leaving only trampled vegetation and blood spots to mark where it had been. Both hunters stood frozen for several long moments, their weapons raised and their hearts hammering so hard they could feel their pulses in their temples. Tyler's shoulder was already swelling where the bear's paw had connected, and blood seeped through his torn jacket. Jason's hands shook so badly that he could barely hold his rifle steady. Around them, the fog continued to drift through the trees as if nothing had happened, as if the last 3 minutes of terror had been some kind of fever dream. They retreated down to a narrow ATV trail they had noticed earlier, moving as quickly as the terrain would allow while constantly looking over their shoulders. Once they reached the relative safety of the trail, they revved the engines of their four-wheelers and got off that ridge as fast as the machines would carry them. Later, after reaching their base camp and treating their injuries as best they could, both men acknowledged how close they had come to becoming statistics. Another pair of hunters who learned too late that on Kodiak Island, humans were never truly at the top of the food chain. On September 10, 2025, the Primorsky Krai region of far eastern Russia remained one of the last strongholds of the critically endangered Siberian tiger. a landscape of dense mixed forests, steep mountains, and countless rivers that drained from the Sikhote-Alin mountain range toward the Sea of Japan. This remote territory, wedged between China and the Pacific coast, had been tiger country for millennia, though human encroachment and poaching had reduced the population to fewer than 600 individuals scattered across vast territories. Hunter Dmitry Volkov had been tracking wild boar along one of these remote rivers for the better part of the afternoon, following fresh rooting signs and tracks that indicated a sounder of at least 6 animals moving through the valley. Dmitry was a local man who had hunted these forests since childhood, carrying a Tiger 308 rifle that was popular among Russian hunters for its reliability in harsh conditions. He understood the risks of hunting in tiger territory and had taken appropriate precautions, moving quietly and staying alert for any signs of the big cats that occasionally crossed his path. The river crossing appeared manageable when he first approached it around 4 in the afternoon. The water was higher than usual from recent rains, but Dmitry had crossed at this spot dozens of times over the years and knew the location of stable rocks beneath the surface. The current was strong, pushing against his legs as he waded in, and the water was shockingly cold, fed by mountain snowmelt even in September. His boots sank into slippery rocks covered in algae and moss, forcing him to move slowly and test each step before committing his weight. He was roughly halfway across, the water reaching his thighs and the current strong enough that he needed to brace himself with each step, when he noticed the birds had gone silent on the far bank. That silence should have warned him, should have sent him scrambling back to the safety of the shore he had just left. But he was focused on maintaining his balance and did not register the danger until it was too late. The Siberian tiger emerged from the dense brush on the far bank like a ghost materializing from mist, its orange and black striped coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows of the forest. The animal was massive, easily 500 pounds of pure muscle and predatory instinct, with shoulders that rippled beneath its fur and paws the size of dinner plates. Its eyes locked onto Dmitry with the focused intensity of an apex predator that had already decided he was prey, and it moved with the fluid grace that made tigers perhaps the most efficient killers in the animal kingdom. The tiger did not hesitate or give any warning beyond its sudden appearance. It launched itself from the bank in a powerful leap that covered the distance to the water in seconds, hitting the river with barely a splash and powering through the current with shocking speed. Dmitry tried to bring his rifle up, tried to chamber around and take aim, but the tiger closed the distance before he could complete the motion. The big cat's jaws clamped onto his upper arm with crushing force, teeth designed to pierce thick hide and crack bone, penetrating through his jacket and into flesh. The impact and the tiger's weight drove Dmitry partially underwater, his boots losing purchase on the slippery rocks beneath him. The current immediately began pulling at both man and predator, threatening to sweep them downstream toward where the river narrowed between large boulders. Pain exploded through Dmitry's arm as the tiger's teeth ground against bone, and he could feel hot blood running down his sleeve despite the cold water soaking his clothes. Dmitry's survival instincts overrode the pain and shock. He kicked hard with both legs, trying to dislodge the tiger or at least prevent both of them from being swept away. His free hand still gripped his rifle, and he swung it in a desperate arc, connecting with the tiger's rib cage with the solid stock. The blow was not particularly powerful, given his awkward position in the water, but it was enough to make the tiger adjust its grip, and in that brief moment, Dmitry managed to get his feet back under him. The tiger released his arm and lunged for his throat instead, the way tigers typically killed their prey. But Dmitry twisted away, and the big cat's jaws snapped shut on empty air. He swung the rifle again, this time with more force, hitting the tiger on its shoulder hard enough to elicit a snarl of pain and frustration. The current was pulling at both of them now, making it difficult for either to maintain a solid footing, and the struggle had become as much about fighting the river as fighting each other. Dmitry spotted a large log protruding from the water about 10 feet downstream, a massive piece of deadfall that had become wedged between rocks and offered the only stable anchor point visible. He stopped fighting against the current and instead used it, letting the water carry him toward the log while keeping his rifle between himself and the tiger. The big cat followed, still intent on its prey, its claws raking across Dmitry's leg and leaving deep gashes through his pants. His hand caught the log just as he was about to be swept past it, and Dmitri used every ounce of remaining strength to haul himself partially onto the stable wood. From this slightly elevated position, he finally managed to bring his rifle to bear properly. The tiger was still in the water, struggling against the current and preparing for another lunge, when Dmitri fired. The shot caught the animal in its side, a solid hit that penetrated deep into vital organs. The tiger's roar of pain was almost human in its intensity, echoing across the valley and sending birds exploding from trees hundreds of yards away. The big cat released Dmitri and turned away, powering through the current back toward the bank it had emerged from. Blood stained the water as the tiger climbed onto shore, and Dmitri could see it was badly wounded, favoring one side as it disappeared into the dense brush. Dmitri remained clinging to the log for several minutes, his entire body shaking from adrenaline, shock, and cold. His arm was badly torn with deep puncture wounds that would require immediate medical attention. His leg burned where the tiger's claws had raked across it, and he could feel blood running down into his boot. The current continued to pull at him, threatening to dislodge his grip on the log, but he was too exhausted to move immediately. Eventually, he forced himself to work his way along the log to the nearest bank, dragging himself onto solid ground and collapsing in the wet grass. He used his belt to fashion a crude tourniquet for his arm, then began the agonizing journey back toward his vehicle parked several miles away through dense forest. Every step was torture, his wounds burning and his clothes soaked and freezing against his skin. Dmitri would survive the encounter, though he required extensive surgery on his arm and would carry the scars for the rest of his life. The tiger's fate remained unknown, though local wildlife officials searched for the wounded animal for several days without success. For Dmitri, the experience served as a brutal reminder that even experienced hunters could become prey in seconds when apex predators exploited natural hazards, and that the wild rivers of Primorsky Krai could transform from obstacles into death traps when territorial tigers decided to attack. In October 2021, the Carpathian Mountains of Slovakia stretched across the eastern portion of the country in rugged peaks, dense forests, and remote valleys that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. This ancient mountain range had been home to brown bears, wolves, lynx, and substantial populations of red deer and elk for thousands of years. The Slovakian Carpathians were particularly notable for their pristine spruce and beech forests, which provided ideal habitat for large ungulates during the autumn rutting season. Hunters Jakub Novak and Thomas Havel had been tracking a trophy bull elk through these mountains for 3 days, following distinctive tracks and telltale scrapes that bulls made on trees during the rut. Both men were experienced hunters from the lowland regions who made annual pilgrimages into the Carpathians during autumn. Jakub carried a Mauser M18 rifle in 8x57 mm, while Thomas preferred his CZ 550 chambered in .30.06 Springfield. Their canvas tent was pitched on a narrow ridge approximately 4,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by dense spruce trees. The location had been chosen because fresh elk signs suggested the animals were using this ridge as a travel corridor between feeding and bedding areas. Their gear was organized inside the tent, rifles leaning against the center pole, and they had hung a quarter of wild boar meat from a tree branch about 50 yards away. The night of October 14th was crisp and cold, with temperatures dropping near freezing and frost forming on the tent canvas. The full moon illuminated the ridge, and the forest was alive with sounds of distant bugling from competing bulls and occasional antler clashes. The air carried the heavy, musky scent of rutting elk, signaling peak breeding season when bulls were at their most aggressive and unpredictable. Around 2:30 in the morning, both men were jolted awake by a violent impact against the tent side. The canvas wall bulged inward dramatically, tent poles creaking under sudden pressure, and they could hear heavy breathing and scraping hooves just outside. Before either hunter could process what was happening, a massive bull elk crashed through the entrance, its enormous antlers catching on canvas and ripping the fabric as it forced its way inside. The bull was truly enormous, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder with antlers spreading almost 6 feet across. Its eyes reflected moonlight through the torn tent, and foam flecked its muzzle from hours of bugling and fighting. The elk had been drawn by the scent of hanging meat combined with tent fabric vibrations, which its rutting-addled brain interpreted as either a rival bull or a territorial threat. The tent interior descended into chaos. The elk pawed at the ground, sharp hooves tearing through sleeping bags and striking sparks off embedded rocks. Jacob, sleeping closest to the entrance, was knocked sideways by the bull's shoulder as it thrashed in the confined space. He hit the ground hard, feeling at least 2 ribs crack, and rolled desperately toward the back, trying to avoid slashing hooves and swinging antlers. Tomas grabbed the first thing available, a cast-iron cooking pot they had used earlier. Despite being empty, the pot was heavy, and he swung it in a wild arc that connected solidly with one antler tine. The metallic clang momentarily startled the bull, causing it to back up slightly and giving Jacob precious seconds to scramble away. But the elk was far from finished. It rammed its antlers into the tent's center pole, and the impact sent the pole splintering. The tent began collapsing around them, canvas falling across the elk's back and entangling its antlers, which only enraged the animal further. It bucked and twisted, trying to free itself while simultaneously destroying everything within reach. Jacob's hands found his rifle in the chaos. Loading it in darkness with broken ribs and a collapsing tent seemed nearly impossible. He could taste blood, and every breath sent sharp pains through his chest. But adrenaline overrode the discomfort. He managed to chamber around just as the elk ripped free from the entangling canvas and turned back toward the tent's interior, where both men were trapped against the back wall. The shot was fired from less than 10 feet away, almost point blank into the elk's shoulder as it lowered its head for another charge. The heavy bullet punched through the animal's chest cavity, and the bull staggered immediately, its front legs buckling. It made one more attempt to lunge forward, but the damage was catastrophic, and the elk collapsed sideways, crushing what remained of their camping equipment beneath its enormous weight. For several long moments, neither hunter moved. They lay in the wreckage, breathing hard, covered in torn canvas and scattered gear, while the bull elk's last breaths rattled in its massive chest. Finally, the ridge fell silent except for the wind through the spruce trees and the distant bugling of other bulls. Jacob and Thomas extricated themselves carefully from the collapsed tent, both moving slowly and testing for additional injuries. Jacob's ribs were definitely broken, each movement sending sharp pains through his torso, and he had numerous cuts and bruises. Thomas had fared slightly better, with only bruising and a badly twisted ankle from avoiding the elk's hooves. They spent the remainder of the night huddled around a fire, wrapped in salvaged sleeping bags, neither man able to sleep after the terrifying encounter. At first light, they examined the scene and realized how close they had come to serious injury or death. The elk had destroyed virtually everything. Rifles had been stepped on and dented, cooking equipment was scattered and crushed, and food supplies were trampled into the dirt. The journey back to civilization took most of the day, moving slowly with Jacob's broken ribs and Tomas supporting much of his friend's weight. They would both recover fully, though Jacob required 6 weeks before his ribs healed completely. The experience left both men with profound respect for the power and unpredictability of rutting elk, and a story that would be retold in hunting camps across Slovakia for years to come. They had learned the hard way that even prey animals could transform into dangerous adversaries when hormones, territory, and bad timing converged on a narrow Carpathian ridge in the middle of an autumn night. In August 2025, the dense forests of western Montana represented some of the most pristine wilderness remaining in the lower 48 states, a landscape of towering ponderosa pines, thick Douglas fir stands, and remote valleys where human presence was measured in days rather than hours between encounters. This particular region had been a traditional hunting ground for thousands of years, and wildlife populations remained robust due to careful management and limited access. Black bears thrived in these forests, feeding on abundant berries, roots, and occasional carrion. Hunter Ryan Caldwell had been stalking mule deer through these forests since dawn, moving quietly through terrain he had hunted for nearly a decade. Ryan carried a Remington Model 700 chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, and his pack contained essentials including water, emergency supplies, and game bags for packing out meat if successful. The morning mist clung to the undergrowth, muffling sounds and reducing visibility to perhaps 30 yards. Ryan had been following fresh deer tracks for roughly 2 hours when he noticed them intersect with a game trail showing signs of heavy recent use, including prints from a large black bear that had passed through within the last day or two. Ryan paused to glass the hillside above him, scanning for movement. The forest was unusually quiet, with none of the normal bird calls or squirrel chatter that typically accompanied a Montana morning. That silence should have warned him, but he was focused on the deer sign and failed to recognize the danger. The black bear exploded from thick brush roughly 20 yards behind him, its sudden charge announced only by breaking branches and a huffing grunt. The bear was massive, easily 450 pounds, its black coat glossy and its eyes fixed on Ryan with predatory focus. Black bears were generally less dangerous than grizzlies, but this animal showed no signs of stopping. Ryan spun around just as the bear closed the distance, its massive paw swinging in an arc that caught him across the back of his legs. The impact sent him stumbling forward, pain exploding through his calves and thighs as claws tore through his pants and raked deep furrows in his flesh. Hot blood ran down his legs immediately, soaking into his boots. The bear pressed forward, jaws open wide. Ryan threw himself backward, tripping over roots and nearly losing his rifle. His back slammed into a fallen log, and for a terrifying moment he was pinned with the bear advancing. Adrenaline flooded his system. Ryan's eyes swept desperately for escape, spotting a massive ponderosa pine roughly 15 feet away, its lowest branches starting about 8 feet up, but with enough rough bark that climbing might be possible. He rolled sideways, the bear's jaws snapping on empty air where his head had been, and scrambled to his feet despite burning agony. He stumbled toward the tree, nearly falling twice while the bear's claws tore gouges in the forest floor behind him. Ryan hit the tree trunk at full speed, pulling himself upward with desperate strength while his wounded legs screamed in protest. The bear lunged just as Ryan pulled his feet up, its jaws snapping shut and missing his boot heel by mere inches. He climbed until reaching a stable branch about 20 feet up, high enough that the bear could not reach him. His legs were badly torn with deep claw marks that would require medical attention. Blood dripped steadily, further agitating the bear below. The bear showed no signs of losing interest. It circled repeatedly, huffing and grunting, occasionally standing upright to test whether it could reach the branches. It settled into patient vigil, lying at the trunk base with casual confidence. Ryan waited nearly 30 minutes, but the animal remained stubbornly present. His legs had gone from burning pain to dull ache, and he knew blood loss combined with shock would eventually make him too weak to maintain his grip. He needed to end this before his injuries incapacitated him. Taking careful aim, Ryan fired a single round into the bear's shoulder. The heavy bullet struck with devastating effect, and the bear roared in pain, spinning as it tried to locate the source. Ryan chambered another round, but the bear had decided this prey was more trouble than worth. The wounded animal lumbered off into thick timber, moving with a noticeable limp. Ryan remained in the tree for another 20 minutes before beginning the painful descent. His legs barely supported his weight, and the hike back to his truck became an agonizing 3-hour ordeal. Ryan used his rifle as a makeshift crutch, stopping frequently to rest and rebandage wounds with shirt strips. By the time he reached his vehicle, he was pale from blood loss and shaking from shock. The hospital required 47 stitches to close the lacerations, and Ryan spent 2 days under observation for potential infection. He recovered fully, though the scars remained as permanent reminders of how quickly a routine hunt could transform into a life-threatening situation, forcing hunters to rely on quick thinking and sheer survival instinct to escape with their lives.